Okay, everyone, welcome to the Potomac Division Virtual Clinic today. Today we have Jonathan Jones. He's an architect that's over in Saudi Arabia. So as I told him yesterday during the test, he probably will hold the record for the most distance from our division as a clinician that we have seen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan and let him talk about the railroad and what he's done. Take it
Well,
away.
thank you so much, Ernie, and thank you, and thanks to the NMRA for putting these presentations together. I've enjoyed others in the past with the NMRAX, so yes, I just wanted to thank the NMRA for putting this together and setting it up and hosting this presentation. So today we're going to talk a little bit about my model railroad in a presentation that I'm calling Portrait of a Railroad. And I model the C&J, that's the Central Railroad of New Jersey's Newark branch. And this is something that I've been working on for several years. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about how I came across this interesting railroad to model and a little bit about my modeling journey. We'll talk a little bit about myself and what my modeling interests are. And above all, we're going to talk a little bit, and this is sort of a promise I make to all of you listening to this presentation. I promise you that we are going to discuss, and I'm going to give you some insights onto a very different approach to model railroad design. I'm an architect by training, and as Ernie said, I'm currently living in Saudi Arabia. Previously, I was in Brooklyn in New York City, and my railroad is still there. And although I'm over here, I'm still doing some tabletop modeling, and we'll talk about that. But yes, I do want to make that promise that I will show you my approach, which is a different approach to model railroad design. And I will show you some applications of alternative sources of vision and inspiration that can be used to design and build a model railroad. So without further ado on that, we can get started. All right, humble beginnings. So this first slide is an interesting one. So again, my name is Jonathan Jones, and I've been a model railroader for probably since I was about, I think seriously since I was about 12 years old. So that's going on I don't know, probably at least 40 years. So I've been in the hobby for a very long time, and this photograph that you see in the upper left, that is my very first layout. And I'd like to show that, just to show that we all have to start somewhere. I was very proud of this layout, even though I had some frustrations with it, as we all do when we're starting out. But it really set the stage and sowed the seeds and taught me a lot of skills that I've built on and carried with me all the way to today. The slide on the lower left is a switching layout, a 2x10 switching layout that I built in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was fortunate to have this layout featured in Model Railroader magazine. And it shows some of my interests in the hobby, which are layout design, track work, urban scenery, and structures. That's what I enjoy. And as we will see going throughout the presentation, you'll see how I've built on that over the years into the current layout that I have. So the photograph on the right is a page taken from the June 1986 Model Railroader. This is an article by Victor Roseman. Victor was a model railroader that I was very fond of when I was young and coming up in the hobby. I remember his photo stories like this one, as well as others, and a lot of the covers that he did for the Walther's catalog. And I was always enthralled with his photographs and his writing and drawings and his work. And one day, it's sort of, I guess it would have been the early 2000s, or I would say, let's say the late aughts of the 2000s. I had this old layout that you see on the lower left, and I was starting to try to think of what I might do next. And I came across this article, and this just seemed like a really almost perfectly made line to model. And so I really thank Victor for writing this article way back in 1986 to sort of give me the seeds and give me the idea for this model railroad that I currently have. So a little bit about the Newark branch. So as I said, this was a branch line of the Central Railroad of New Jersey. And this map gives you a sense of where it ran and what it connected to. You can see towards the top that it ran from Newark, New Jersey, all the way to Jersey City. And from Jersey City, it had connections by water to Manhattan, to Brooklyn, and also to the Bronx. There were also connections by water from Jersey City down to places on the shore, like Cape May. It was possible to take a train, you know, a holiday special or a summer holiday special from Newark to Jersey City and get on a boat and head down to Cape May and spend your day at the beach, and then come back by boat to Jersey City, get on the train, and head back home to Newark or any of the other stops along the way. It's a fairly short line. It's about 6.7 miles long. It's got a large Y, which we can see at Brill's Yard, roughly at the, I'm going to call it the quarter point from Newark. And at that Y, the line turned down to Elizabethport. And from Elizabethport, the line went further south to New Jersey and also points west in New Jersey, Scranton, Allentown, and Philadelphia. So that's how the Newark branch connected to everything else. So what were some of the features that drew me to this railroad? Well, one of the main ones was that it was very small. As I mentioned, it was only about 6.5 miles long. And I said, you know, that's great. It's good to start with something that's already small. I was living in an apartment in Brooklyn, so I didn't have a huge amount of space to do something, and it seemed like a really a great prototype to start with. Not only was it small, but it had what I like to call really big features. It had very heavy infrastructure. In a lot of ways, it didn't look at all like a branch line. It carried freight. It carried passengers. It had heavy industries. It was ran through some very gritty urban scenery. It had some very interesting urban architecture, like bi-level passenger stations and bridges with very strange geometry, signals, interlockings, interesting motive power, and excellent opportunities for operation. As I said, there was freight switching along the way. There were commuter trains. There were some long distance passenger trains. Early in the career of the line, there were even passenger trains from foreign roads like the Baltimore and Ohio, and also the Reading. So it seemed like a great thing, a great line to model. And what I elected to bite off at first was what you see in the non-shaded rectangle, which was the towns or station stops of Newark and East Ferry Street. I elected to skip Ferry Street Station for reasons which I will explain later. But it just seemed like a really great line to model, small, but a lot of stuff that you would see on normally much bigger railroads that I could choose to model or not. So just to give you a sense of what this railroad looked like from the beginning and the end. So on the left, we see the street side view of Newark Broad Street Station. You can see the sign there below Central Railroad of New Jersey reads Reading Lines in Baltimore and Ohio. And then you can see on the right, the Seaside station for the Central Railroad of New Jersey at the very east end of the Newark branch. And you can see where the ferries came in and where people could leave by boat. And here we see the business ends of both of those terminals. On the left, we have the Newark terminal, and you can see it's very small. It's 4 station tracks. It has a railway express agency, and at the lower left corner of that slide on the left, you can see a team yard there. And on the right, you can see Jersey City, which was much the opposite. It was huge. I think that's maybe a dozen a dozen sheds there, which is almost 24 tracks going into the terminal at Jersey City. And you can see there's a bright, shiny pair of RDCs pulling out of there. So some of the features of the line that I like, well, like I said, it had this very, very heavy infrastructure. So this scene right here on the left, this would eventually become the signature scene on my railroad. But you can see the line crossing over the Northeast corridor, and just the heavy infrastructure that was required to elevate the line so that they could run continuously without having constant grade crossings and such. On the right, you can see what one of those abutments look like, and that abutment and that bridge are still there today. They're absolutely massive, as you can see from the people walking by. And that really intrigued me, just to have a branch line that just had massive infrastructure and also a complexity with, the elevated roadbed and things kind of weaving and winding underneath of it. And I thought that was would be a really cool thing to model. So here's a few shots of some of the other infrastructure that it had. So it had interlocking towers and interlockings and signals. You can see the semaphore on the right. You can see the interlocking tower on the upper left at NA Tower. This is in Newark. A really cool looking building, which I made a model of high up on stilts. And then you can see another tower, BT Tower at Brills Junction. That is at the west leg or the west junction of the Y that turns down to Brills that we saw in the map previously. Elevated bi-level passenger stations, again, just the heavy infrastructure and the complexity of it. So, for example, we see on the upper left, this is the station at East Ferry Street. This station is actually a triangle from the top view and a plan view, and it's elevated, it's bi-level. So on the upper left, you see it from street side, and on the upper right, you see it from track side. And that kind of juxtaposition really appealed to me. On the lower right, you see Jackson Avenue Station, which I didn't elect to model. It was much farther down the line, but you see the street level view. And then just to the left of that, you see Jackson Avenue Station trackside, and it's actually where it goes down. So the railroad is in a deep cut there. And all of these things were just really fascinating to me about the topography that the line traversed and how they handled crossing the other infrastructure of the city. Heavy industry, tons of industries. Model railroaders like freight switching, a lot of us anyway, and this railroad had it in spades. So it served some of the major industries of the United States during the machine age, to include some of the ones you see here. Not all of these would make it onto the first version of the layout or the second one, as we will see, but some of them did, and some of them are famous, such as Ballantine Beer, Naparano Steel. Naparano scrapped a lot of steam locomotives, Western Electric, Sherwin-Williams, and the Celanese Corporation, which was largely responsible for what I guess they called maybe space age fabrics back in the day, and the 50s, nylon and rayon and other similar types of materials like that. Interesting power. So on the steam side, the New Jersey Central had a lot of really creative motive power. They ran a lot of camelbacks because in the western regions of the line, they carried a lot of anthracite coal. Anthracite is a very hard coal, and because you can't pile it up as thick in the firebox because it burns slower, they had to make the firebox wider. So that is the reason for the wide firebox on the camelback locomotives, which we can see at the upper right and lower left. They had a lot of tank locomotives, which we can see here, side tanks and also rear tanks, because there was a lot of commuter service, a lot of service between Newark and Jersey City, or Newark and Elizabethport. And these small locomotives with just a side tank or a rear tank were perfect for the CNJ. You'll notice that they both have symmetrical rail arrangements of one that has a 262 and the other has a 464T. And again, that's because of the type of service that they ran through or that they provided. And the New Jersey Central was a fan of symmetrical wheel arrangements because the locomotives could run equally well forward and backward. So very unique steam power. Also really interesting diesel power. We see on the left H15s, H1544s and H1644s, plus RS3s, a couple of favorites of mine, plus a smattering of others as we see there, some Baldwin and some from Budd, and eventually locomotives from EMD. Great operation possibilities. So looking at the upper left, this is an interesting shot. This GP7 is actually backing its commuter train from Burles Junction. That's BT Tower on the right there, from Burles Junction all the way back to Newark. And that is how they got into Newark, by backing in. In the early days, they got into Newark from Jersey City, also the same way. So they backed the entire 6.5 miles from Jersey City. In 1946, there was a bridge over the Hackensack River that got knocked out. So service to Jersey City was discontinued, and everything went from Newark to Burles and turned down south, as we saw in that map, down to Elizabethport. But the trains, commuter trains, still backed in. Interesting operations at Newark Broad Street. We see on the lower right a shot, a vintage shot. I think this was probably taken in the 20s. You can see it's chock full of commuter cars. You can see some of those side tank 262 locomotives there. You can see the traveling crane and the team tracks full of gondolas, box cars, hopper cars. Pretty much everything and anything could go to those team tracks. So a lot of really interesting operation to be gained from modeling this line. So let's talk a little bit about layout design. Actually, before I do that, I just wanted to ask if anyone had any questions so far. Okay, all right, so I will continue. All right, so talk a little bit about the Newark branch. So about my model of the Newark branch. So I've had two versions of the railroad. The first one was in my previous apartment in Brooklyn, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And the second one is in a new Brooklyn apartment that utilizes the first railroad and expands it. So I was very fortunate to find a good space to expand the layout and make it really be what I wanted it to be. So we'll take a look at that next. All right, so here's this line diagram of the CNJ Newark branch again. And you can see in the rectangle, the empty rectangle, the non-shaded rectangle, that is the portion that I had modeled in the first iteration of the CNJ. And in the second iteration, you see the red shaded rectangle, which includes Burles Junction and one leg of that Y that turns down to Elizabethport. And so in terms of setting, sort of creating a box for my railroad design to fit into, I decided I would model the Newark terminal from Newark and East Ferry Street initially. And then the new layout would include Burles Junction. It would be a shelf-style layout. This would be my first foray into prototype modeling. And for any of you that are not familiar with prototype modeling, it's basically where you take a real railroad, which we refer to as the prototype, and you use that as your model and imitate it so that you can get something that looks realistic and functions in a realistic way for operations. And I would concentrate on urban scenery. The era would be 1955. This would be done in N scale. And one of the major things was that I wanted to bring to this railroad, both the first iteration and the one that I'm currently working on, is a modeling style that is more artistic. I wanted to draw on a similar process to what I would use when designing a building. And I was really, at the end of the day, really just searching for a different way to design and build a model railroad. You know, I've been in the hobby for a while, And I just wanted to explore something new and different and see where that would take me. So to start, we can look at layout design elements. And this is an important concept. A layout design element, you can see the definition down there, but it's basically a piece or a section or a feature of a prototype railroad, a real railroad, that you would model as faithfully as possible. And in designing a model railroad, you can take these LDEs and string them together, much like a real railroad would do. And that can serve as the basis for a model railroad design and track plan. So one of the first LDEs that I decided to model, and this formed the basis for the first iteration of the CNJ, is the Newark terminal. And one of the great things about it was that it was small, as I mentioned in the beginning. You can see here the whole thing was approximately 2,500 feet long, and that ended up being about 15.5 to 16 feet in end scale, which was perfect. I might have to, I told myself I might have to compress it a little bit, but not much, and I could probably keep most of the features. And on the right, you can see an aerial shot of the Newark Broad Street terminal, not the whole thing, but enough to get a gist of what I was trying to do. You can see how it's elevated. You can see the Pennsylvania Railroad going underneath the CNJ. And this is an older aerial photograph from the 20s before the new, sort of new in air quotes, and current Newark Penn Station was built. So as we go through the presentation, you'll see what the later version of it looked like. And of course, if you travel from Washington, D.C. to New York, you will be able to see it for yourself because it's still there. So LDE2, this LDE was not on the original, the first version of the layout, but it's one that I wanted to include on this one. And this is an interesting urban situation. You can see the geometry of this bridge is very, very strange. It's not a rectangle, nor is it even a parallelogram. It's some kind of very strange trapezoid. And that all comes about because of the clash of systems here. We've got the railroad as one system going in a straight line. And then we've got the grid of the streets going on its own order, coming in at a very strange angle and making an intersection, seemingly the worst possible place for a bridge. But that also makes for something really interesting. And so this is a bridge and a scene and a model that I wanted to make and have on the new version of the CNJ. The layout design element number 3 was East Ferry Street. So this one, we can see it on the Sanborn map on the left. This one was included on the first iteration, but it was highly modified because I didn't have a whole lot of room, and that was something that I wanted to change in the new version, which we will see. But this was a really great layout design element for a lot of reasons. So number one, it had a really large industry. You can see the Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company, which was up on trestle work. As a matter of fact, many of the spurs, which you can see in the Sanborn map, that sort of yellow dashed line indicator there, were up on trestle work because most of the line all the way down to Brills was elevated. So anytime something branched off from the main tracks, it was up on this really skinny trestle work, which also made a really neat scene in the city. We also have, you can see East Ferry Street Station. You can see there where it's a triangle shape. And again, that is because of the clash of systems here. We have the railroad going at one angle, and then we have Ferry Street, East Ferry Street rather, going at another very crazy angle, resulting in this parallelogram style bridge and also a bi-level station, which we can see on the lower right here. So here you can see both levels of the station. Here's this really beautiful, very spindly, this is one of the older bridges that remained on the line, very spindly truss bridge going over Ferry Street. And then up here, at the top, you can clearly see the triangle shape of the East Ferry Street Station and the trestle work for the Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company. Now, this photograph of the coal company was taken soon after a tremendous fire in 1961, where much of it burned down. There used to be two sets of pair of tracks here. One of them was taken out years ago, but the other one remained for a while, but eventually caught fire. It was apparently a very horrific fire. You can see there's lots of barrels stored between the trestle work here, that's right here, between the trestle work and the track. And this was a wooden trestle where all the crew members were coated with creosote and also full of coal dust from years of dumping coal. So it seems like that was unfortunately an accident waiting to happen. But the photograph gives you a sense of what it must have looked like. So this is an industry that I want to have on the layout and do it justice in the extension that I'm building. So the fourth layout design element is Brill's Junction, and this place fascinated me just because it had that real sort of down at the tracks feel. Kind of the place that, maybe your parents would tell you, don't go over there to play. But of course, it ended up being the best place to play. It just kind of had that feeling, just a lot of stuff going on. And it has a feature that I thought would be really useful, which we can see on the Sanborn map. This down here, this is the Pennsylvania Railroad's P&H branch going over top of the CNJ. Here's the CNJ here, and the Pennsylvania Railroad here, along with a state highway right next to it. And I thought that would make a great entry and exit to a staging yard. I'll explain staging yards a little bit later, but you can see in this Ballantine beer shot, you can see the two bridges here and how that could possibly be create an opening into the backdrop to go into staging so the trains can come and go, much like actors on a stage during a play enter and exit the wings. So that's kind of what I mean by staging, and we'll take another closer look at that as we get deeper into the presentation. The Ballantine beer sign was another big element that I wanted to include. I'd like to model it in a more artistic fashion, so I probably won't have too many of the buildings, mostly because I don't have room, but it will be the sign, the huge sign with the 3 red rings, and then, huge block letters, home of Ballantine. And that's something I want to capture, as well as what we see here, BT Tower on the lower right. And operationally, BT Tower is really great to have, because then I'm operating between 2 towers, NA in Newark and BT at Brill's Junction, where the line either enters or exits the staging yard as it heads either to Newark or turns south to Elizabethport. And I felt that was something really convenient. Plus BT Tower looks kind of cool with all the sheds and the oil tanks and stuff behind it. All right, so this is the first iteration of the CNJ Newark branch. And I was very fortunate to have an article about this in Model Railroad Planning last year, that would be MRP 2023. And that covered this version of the layout. And you can see here, it maintains the linear feel of the CNJ's Newark branch. This area of Newark Broad Street was largely kept intact. I'd say it's maybe about 30% compressed, but not too much. It's a little bit compressed in width also, so I don't have quite as many tracks going from front to back, but I have at least one track to represent every track or group of tracks that was there, and that's turned out to be okay. It also has a really nice, tiny little engine terminal here, which was great. That's something that I've always wanted on the layout. You can see the signature scene here where this crosses the Pennsylvania Railroad. This up here would be the entry to Newark Penn Station. You can see an industry here as it continues. This is East Ferry Street with the triangular station. and the parallelogram truss bridge. Actually, the triangular station is here. I'm sorry. This is my version of East Ferry Street is flipped front to back and end to end to try to make it work. You can see here are the two tracks for Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal. Here's the triangular station, and then here's the bridge. And then this was a small lift out staging or fiddle yard. Again, that's staging yard is something used to allow the trains to enter or exit the scene, to give them a place to go to and come from, to make the operation of the railroad a lot more realistic and very similar to in appearance once the train is on stage to what you would see if you were standing trackside and seeing the trains go by. This was a very simple lift out that I built during COVID. It was basically just layers of foam on some light wood strips to keep it rigid. This was the entry to the living room basically, and so I would take this in and out as needed when I wanted to have an operating session. One of the things that I always missed with this layout, actually a couple of things were, East Ferry Street was flipped end to end and front to back, and I didn't really like that so much. And I really wanted better staging with more tracks and a loop, which would allow me to operate commuter trains in sort of a continuous loop, so they could kind of just keep coming and going like the real ones did. Didn't have any room for that on this particular version of the layout. I made do with this staging yard, which was actually quite fun, but I longed for something bigger and better. And guess what? In 2022, I found it. So I was looking for a larger apartment again, because model railroaders always want to expand their empires. And I came across one, a really beautiful pre-war apartment, not far from where I was in Brooklyn. And I looked closely at the floor plan, which I always do, and I noticed that it appeared to have a second living room. And as soon as I noticed that, I hopped on my bike and rode over and saw the space immediately. And you can see in this picture right here, the upper right, this was the room. And I was kind of stunned. I just didn't think that this would be something that would exist. And I ended up purchasing the apartment and renovating the apartment. It was quite old and needed a good going over. So I was able to do that and create a new trail room for myself. So this is a shot of it in progress. But I was very fortunate. I consider this apartment in some ways to be a unicorn apartment because it's just I don't know. I just never thought that I would be able to happen on something like this by stroke of luck. But I did, and it's so far it's worked out great. So we'll take a look at what I've been able to do with the space. All right, so these drawings show my first sketches of how I went about planning to expand the layout. Some of the things I wanted, which I mentioned, are larger staging with a loop. I wanted to be able to do justice to East Ferry Street, so have it oriented properly and have it show everything roughly in the size and orientation that it actually was. I wanted to include Brill's Junction, so that I could have a good endpoint or anchor point, again, between Newark NA Tower and Brill's BT Tower, and a good entry and exit into staging. The other thing I really tried very hard to do, which was not to build too much. I wanted to keep as much of the room open as possible because I wanted to keep the room nice. I wanted to make it a pleasant place to be, plenty of aisle space. I also needed it to be have room to work, with the work table, so I could, cut board and cut wood and, do all the things that we do as model railroaders, and have room for a nice workbench. I have a large architect's table that is approximately 7 feet long, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of room for that. So this first sketch on the left, you can see here, this sort of rectangle represents the initial layout that we were just looking at. And my first attempts at sort of doodling and saying, oh, let me do the minimum. I really didn't want to go in front of the window. That seemed awkward to me. And here's the minimum, and maybe we can squeeze in something here and put the loop and have staging in the middle and in a view block. And that was okay. I kind of kept sketching on that. He was a slightly larger version to give me some room in here to do Brill's Junction. This is a sort of a blow-up sketch of what something like this might have looked like. Again, with Brill's here, you can see BT and Ballantine. And I just thought that that was going to be a little bit too crammed. And I didn't like how this peninsula was sticking into the middle of the room. It made a whole bunch of the room unusable and left some awkward spaces in the corners. So it seemed like I was not building very much like I wanted to, but I wasn't really getting along the benefits from that. So in this sketch, we see a slightly more mature version of this first one. I'm still afraid to go entirely in front of the window. You can see I've got some space here, but I've sort of stretched this out. I've got a loop. I'm trying to think, should it turn in or should it turn out? Again, I didn't like this version so much because it left some empty space here that was kind of awkward. One of the things that you can see here is I'm starting to add in all the other stuff that I know is going to go in the room or could potentially go in the room. There was going to be a ceiling fan there, perhaps a sofa or a small couch, my architect's table, and then a work table here, and then the entry is right here. One of the things you can see is these numbers here and on the side. This is a technique that I use to freehand draw things and keep them roughly to scale. So I draw this in. This is the existing railroad, which is, I just draw that as roughly 2 feet. It's actually a little bit less, but I just round up to give myself space. Then I go 3 feet because I know there's going to be an aisle. And then the railroad room is about a little over 12 feet wide. So that means I've got 5 and then 2, right? The 2 feet is for a loop roughly. So that kind of keeps me from going too far astray, even though I'm drawing by hand. You can see it again here, just kind of looking at the sizes of different things and just adding stuff up to see what will fit. Again, just keeps me sort of tethered to reality. This little drawing here shows how things are actually going to work. Going across the window, I've got my track height here and making sure that that's not going to run into the windowsill and figuring out where you might be able to put an air conditioner and one day a paint booth. So just starting to think about all the other uses that might be involved in this room along with the layout. And then on the right here, we'll see something that's pretty close to what I ended up with. You can see I've got the original layout. I've got East Ferry Street here. This would actually become Jefferson Avenue, and then East Ferry would move around here in this roughly, as we can see, roughly 7 to 8 foot space right here. That would give it enough room to do it justice and let it be in the proper orientation. This sort of these 2 lines right here represent that Pennsylvania P&H branch and how the railroad would disappear in the staging. And then I've looped up the staging, bent it around the corner, and added the loop. Again, not every track is shown, but just sort of moduling and measuring things out to see what would generally fit. And then at the same time, sketching certain things that were important to me. You can see this little sketch of Brill's Junction with some of the most important items. You can see the multiple tracks, the bridges over for the P&H branch and the highway. There's BT Tower with the little shed, and then the signal bridge, and then Ballantine Butter. There would be a fence here, and the sign would be somewhere over here. So just beginning to kind of put all these elements into a box and see how they might fit in there. And this is how the new plan turned out. So you can see the layout space at 12.8 by roughly 20 feet. I've indicated the old layout here. Some of it, this here will get redone. You remember that East Ferry Street was here, but now this is going to be Jefferson Avenue. So I was able to get that in and get the bridge to be true to the prototype, to the real thing with that strange geometry. Created a view block here because the CNJ was pretty straight, as we saw in the maps and the straight line diagram, hiding the curve as it goes around the room. Another view block, and then you enter East Ferry Street Station. You can see here the triangular station, the parallelogram truss bridge, and then Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre, and then this spur going off to Celanese with a little bit of track on a trestle. So I'm able to get sort of the primary features that are going to make this a recognizable scene, trying to be very careful to get that. And we'll see some other examples of that as we move on with, especially with this signature scene right here. After East Ferry Street, we get to Brills Junction. You can see this captures most of the elements that I've talked about. You can see the highway and the PRR going over Brills Junction here. There's BT Tower. There's a signal bridge and a signal bridge, and this is a really simplified but basic interlocking, which will allow me to move trains from one track to the other, and will work well with this one over here, NA Tower. This spur goes off to Valentine Beer. Again, there won't really be too many buildings for Valentine Beer. It'll just kind of go off behind a fence. But right here is where I will build a large model of the Valentine Beer sign with the three rings. And I've got one industry kind of parked back here just to keep things interesting on the switching. Once you come underneath the PRR, you're into the staging yard. I've got several tracks. This is a fiddle yard, which means that trains will be there, but as they come in and out, I will physically be able to take rolling stock on and off and change trains and bring more trains in and out and onto the railroad. And then I've got my loop here, which I've always wanted. So the commuter trains will leave, they will go to Newark, pick up passengers or drop off passengers. They will come back, go around on the other track, and then go right around and restage themselves so another one can come back. So that way I can have, say, 5 to 7 commuter trains in an op session, but I might actually need 2 or 3 physical trains to do it because I can just recycle them because they're pretty much the same. You can see here a view block. This is there to help support this part of the railroad and just hide some of the staging. I've got this little tail track here, and that is specifically for the RDCs. So RDC stands for Rail Diesel Car, and it was a self-propelled car that the CNJ used in pairs. And they did that to save money, and they would serve on a lot of the commuter trains. And the way this works operationally is that an RDC pair would come from Broad Street, pass East Ferry, go through Brills, come down here, go through this, and then back up and sit right here in this little pocket. This pocket is enough to hold 2 pairs of RDCs until we can get ready to come back. And it keeps the RDC operation separate from the other commuter train operation so that they don't foul each other, and I can bring them in at pretty much at will. So you can see here how I was able to keep most of the room open. I've got a work table here, my architect's table here, so that this is where I build models. This is where I do some of the messier stuff like cut wood or cut board or cardstock. But I'm able to do all of those things in this room, and there's still a good amount of space to walk around. On the right is a layout cross section, and I always like to show these because I feel that drawing something in a section gives you some opportunities for design. And sometimes I feel that this drawing is not taken advantage of as much as it should be by layout designers. And one of the things it allows you to do is really start to, see things like layout depth to layout height relationships. But one of the other things that it allows you to do is it allows you to study the relationship between your lighting, your valence, and your layout depth and fascia. And that's important. Also, the backdrop, that's important because all of those things are actually working together to give you the scene and the impression that you see when you model your railroad on this, more or less flat surface or shelf-like surface. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm very interested in framing things. A lot of model railroaders talk about the shadow box look of a model, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, but I'm thinking of it in a larger sort of context. And I wanted to make sure that I would frame things properly. So I really thought about the function of the backdrop, and I really thought about how I wanted my lighting to work, and I also really thought about the valence. And one thing that became apparent to me was that the depth of this valence was very important for framing. I've got this diagram drawn here. This is eye level, standing in normal viewing distance away from the layout. And I wanted this valence to be deep enough so that you could not see the top of the backdrop. And that was very important for framing the scenes properly. The quote unquote shadow box look that I was going after. The other purpose of the valence, the one that I think we're mostly used to, is to hide the lights. I've got 2 strips of LED lights here. But I think that using the valence as a framing device is something that's often missed. And the depth of it is very important in order to achieve that. Again, from a normal viewing distance, you don't want to see this top edge of the backdrop, because if you contain that sort of viewing window, it keeps your eyes focused on the scene. And again, it frames a scene much like a photographer's photograph, or even a frame around a painting. It defines what you want people to see and how they see it. And that's something that I think is very important, especially on a shelf type layout. One of the things that became apparent was that the bottom of this is a tad low, so I've hinged it so that when I'm working on the layout, I don't bump my head. It's a useful feature, but in all honesty, I've never really used it. I'm used to working on the layout, so I guess I somehow unconsciously or subconsciously just dip my head every time I want to go in there and do some work, so I haven't really had to lift it up ever. But the feature is there if I need it. And so I had this new space, which meant that I had to move the original layout. So here you can see it on the left. I hired some art movers to move it. Our layouts are difficult to move because not only are they delicate, but they're bulky at the same time. But these guys did a great job. They came a couple of times and they measured everything, and they made some custom cardboard boxes for it, and it went in and out pretty much without any problems. On the right, you can see in the room. The room wasn't quite finished. It was almost there, but you can see that it's up on the shelf brackets. I've got the supports for the what we call the lighting canopy. That's the sort of artificial ceiling that I need to make sure that my lights are the right height above the layout. That's another reason why designing in a section like we saw is very useful, because you can see all those relationships. That's very important, because if you can't see the relationship, then you really don't have a good opportunity to design it. You can kind of trick yourself that you have it in your head, but again, you're probably still missing an opportunity if you don't show yourself the situation. In this view, you can also see the view block is in place. You can see that it doesn't go all the way up to the ceiling, nor does it go to the floor. And I did that just to make sure that there was as much daylight still allowed into the room as possible, and for good ventilation. So I'm not creating any kind of strange airflows or anything, or little microclimates on the other side of this view block. And I put a hole in it just to make sure that it stayed connected with the room. So you can be on the other side of it and still be connected to the room. I felt like that was a good architectural feature to have. Again, this is a train room, but I wanted it to be a pleasant place to be, whether I was working on the trains or not. All right. So I wanted to ask at this point if anyone has any questions so far. All right. So I'm going to continue. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my um, approach to design, and my approach is very different, which I alluded to in the beginning when I talked about my promise to you all for listening in to this presentation. And you know, I was just searching for a really a novel approach to how to do a model railroad. I have this statement here: if everything is important, then nothing is important. And basically, what that boils down to is I wanted to try a design approach where there was more of a hierarchy than model railroaders usually exercise. Most of the time, we usually make pretty much everything important. You know, pretty much everything is done to the same degree, or we attempt to do it to that degree. And we also usually do everything in a realistic fashion. And I just felt like, while I know that is a way to do things, I wanted to see if there was a different way to do things, because I don't think that that's the only way. So with that said, let's continue on with this idea. So again, you know, as I was developing this layout, both the first iteration of the CNJ and the expansion, you know, I just started to think about how we approach modeling railroads, which we all know and love, and just different ways to do that. And I began looking at what some of the assumptions were that we often make when we approach design and model building. Things like, you know, replicating things exactly. On the right, you can see a shot from my a previous HO scale layout, a HO scale switching layout. This one was also, I believe, featured in Model Railroader years ago. But this, you know, this shows the typical treatment. Everything is realistic. Things are handled and treated pretty much all the same. You know, the building is more or less as realistic and detailed as this crane, as this locomotive, as the track. Even the backdrop is fairly detailed, and even this little crossing tower on the back is, you know, it's all kind of done the same. And I just was thinking, you know, maybe that's not the only way to do it. You know, there's been a lot of talk, and I read many articles and listened to many podcasts about talking about how model railroading is an artistic endeavor, which I firmly believe it is. But I felt like there was a little bit lacking in our approach to make it that way. And I thought of a couple ideas about that, which were, one, that we can think of our railroads as portraits, right? It's like you would do a portrait of a king or a loved one or an important person, you know, and the portrait is not always realistic. But even if it is, it's done from a certain point of view. And if we want to be more artistic about our model railroads and really make them rise to the occasion, so to speak, then I think, you know, it would help. And I thought it would help me if I did something more along the lines of what artists do. And when I say that, I mean, you know, that artists they usually don't replicate, even if it's a portrait, even a realistic portrait of a person. They usually do it in some particular way to heighten the qualities of that person, or they'll do it from a particular point of view to show some characteristic of that person. And so a lot of times it doesn't come out exactly like we see them in life, because the artist is trying to communicate something about the person. He's trying to show them in a different way when doing their portrait, which makes the viewer understand the person in a different way or see something different about them. Or there might be a certain treatment that just makes maybe what could be an ordinary person very special just by how it's treated. So all this is to say is just really, in my design process, questioning, how I could think differently and how I could use more artistic concepts and an artistic representation for modeling a railroad, especially prototype railroading, which almost, is something that wants to push the other way and be more about replication and exact duplication. So I set up kind of a challenge for myself, but I think I came up with something interesting. But we will go on and get deeper into that. So I started looking at other visual arts for cues or clues or ideas about what tools or approaches I could take to come up with a different way of representing my model railroad, of doing a portrait of the CNJ. I looked at painting, film, architecture, and photography. And here are some examples of, I guess, takeaways from what I was looking at and thinking about. So on the right, this is a very famous painting. You will find this pretty much on any survey of modern art from the 40s, that covers the 40s all the way to the 70s. And it's an interesting piece because it is a portrait, kind of like how we see our model railroads, or how we can see our model railroads. It's very realistic, but there are two primary tools here used to take it out of the sort of realistic frame and show it in a different way. As you can see, one of them is that it's huge. It's perhaps, I don't know, 10 or 12 times life size. It has a certain point of view. It's maybe not necessarily a very flattering point of view, but again, by doing that, it shows something about the person that maybe we wouldn't normally see, and it heightens certain characteristics of that person. The other tool, of course, that's used is that it's in black and white. So even though it's realistic, it takes a position on what it wants to show and how it wants to show it, so that the viewer is presented with this image that makes the person special, puts them in a different light, or shows us things about the person that we might not normally notice. And I thought that was an interesting tool that we could use. Over here on the upper right, this is a still shot from a movie that I saw way back in 2006 called Dogville. And this one was very interesting because the set was much like the set of a play, for one thing, but it was also very reductive. So the only things that were actually pieces of the set were the things that were needed to explain the story, and everything else had been edited out. So for example, you can see here, this movie takes place in a small mining town. And you can see there was a church, and the church is shown with nothing but the door, the bell tower, the seats, and this little pulpit here for the preacher. Why is that? Because that is all that's needed to tell the story. And when the scene designer did that, it puts the actors in direct contact with all of the thing that is important for telling the story, right? So not everything is important, right? You can see the roads are just sort of, everything's just drawn on here, including the roads and the street names, but these things are, and so everything else is left out. And again, with a dark background like this, it really, really makes things stand out. You can really see them. You can see the actors interact with them. It makes all of these things even more important. And I thought that was an interesting concept, an interesting tool to use. So on the lower right, down here, we have this image by the famous photographer, O. Winston Link. Some of you may be familiar with his work, but he was a photographer that became famous for taking photographs of steam trains on the Norfolk and Western in the mid to late 50s, when steam was dying out or had already died out on all other mainline railroads. And so he captured these things, the life of them at that time, right before they and their way of life the way of life around them was gone. And what he did was he took these pictures at night, and what that does is it takes a very familiar, everyday, ordinary, mundane object, a railroad, a locomotive, and it puts it in a completely different context, right? So, for example, if we were here before he snapped, all of those flash bulbs to make this image, it wouldn't have looked like this. We would have hardly been able to see it. But he's chosen a point of view and he's chosen a technique that makes this ordinary object show up in a very unique and special way, almost paradoxical, because it's a black steam locomotive at night, but it shows up extremely well. And so I thought that idea of taking a familiar object and putting it in a different context to make it show up differently would be something that could be used in a model railroad to make things pop and to make what we think or what we decide is the most special, to make it actually be special. And then I looked at architectural models, and they do some similar things here. I want to talk about these images because they really speak to the idea of hierarchy. So you can see here that first of all, like I had in that lead slide, like not everything is important or as important as certain other things. You can see that the main volumes of the house are shown in sort of very subtle colors, and they are clearly, versus the background of the contour model, just gray, and this photographic background black, they show up very well. And you immediately understand what's the most important, what is the main subject, and what is context. And that's something that I thought was a very interesting thing. I also liked how certain materials, again, were not shown or replicated exactly. They were suggested, like the siding of the house. These are obviously, metal and glass doors down here. This patio is something else. And I thought that those would be very useful tools. So what did I do with all of these ideas and images? Well, I sat down and thought about them, and I came up with an approach where I would give hierarchy to different pieces of the railroad scene. For example, the equipment and right-of-way and infrastructure would be and could be full color and detailed. The structures, much like the actors that interact with those pieces in the Dogville set, would also be the structures that interact directly with the railroad would also be realistic and in full color. Other structures and elements that were context that did not interact directly with the railroad would be in a monochromatic color, probably a gray. Those elements are needed because they have to show why the railroad is the way it is, but they're not the most important. And then I would show the backdrop in a black velvet to absorb light and redirect focus back onto the trains, kind of like you see in these little test images here, and make that backdrop purposefully not realistic, but something that would heighten the presence of the trains. So how would I put all this together? So this is the signature scene. Sorry for the blurry slide, but it kind of shows the basic elements that I need here. So this is the signature scene here. Now here we are after I call it post 1935. So here you can see the entrance to Newark Penn Station. You can see the CNJ going over, and this is the Pennsylvania Railroad going underneath. And there are certain elements in this scene that were important in order to pull it off. We see the large warehouse. We see the elevated embankment for the yard and the interlocking here. We see this highway going underneath. We've got the smokestack. We have this entry to Newark Penn Station, the Pennsylvania Railroad going underneath. We've got this 3-span plate girder bridge, and then we've got these factories. And I said, well, if I want to pull this off, I need to have those elements. So I took those elements, I designed a scene I took these ideas from these artists and from the architectural modeling and the film and everything, and this is what I ended up with. So this looks, I'm sure, very different from most model railroads, but I'm very happy with it in that it really pushed me to develop a new way to think about how to design a model railroad, and it pushed me to develop some new techniques for how to do some of these things and how to actually pull some of this stuff off. But you can see it's got the signature elements. You see the warehouse, the smokestack, the entry to Newark Penn Station. Here's the Pennsylvania Railroad going underneath. Here's the highway going underneath, another stack, and then this little foundry building that was also over here. This is another view. I think this one is interesting. You can see here's this large concrete abutment that we saw before, and you can see the Pennsylvania kind of weaving in, and you can really see how the dark backdrop sort of makes the trains pop out visually. Again, very different, not the normal way you would do things, but I really like the overall effect that it's achieved. So a little bit about framing and hierarchy. So, this was a new approach to how to do urban scenery and model railroading and prototype railroading. So I had to figure out how I was going to achieve some things. So for example, how did I decide to, make this gray and how much detail to put on this building and so on. So I really had to decide, what was context. And, this Pennsylvania going underneath seemed to definitely be context because I needed to show why this bridge is here and why the supports are where they are. You'll notice that the spans are not all the same. And so I need something to play off of that bridge to show its reason for being. But that thing doesn't need to be at the same level of detail or appearance as the bridge. And by making it less so, by sort of ratcheting it down and making it this sort of monochromatic gray, it doesn't steal attention, but it performs its function and shows the context. The other thing that was important was to capture, the sort of topography. So you can see this is actually a hill that starts going up right here. And then we've got, this is up on an embankment, then this cuts down, and this is in a trough, which we can see over here. And these are all taken from actual measurements. I made a trip out to Newark on a summer day and, went and measured some of these things because, I thought it was very important to capture how these things were done. And you can see the streets are done in a way that's similar to the Dogville set. Once I show this street is a black or dark gray with the street name on it, I feel like it communicates the idea. And once I've done that, that's as far as I need to take it. Similar to how I treated these railroad tracks of the Pennsylvania that you can see here and also over here. Sometimes I get asked, why don't you, or are you going to put the rails on it? And the answer is no, because once I have those ties on there like that, that's enough to communicate the idea of railroad track. It's enough to give pretty much anybody, even a non-model railroader, an understanding of the scale of what it is. If I didn't have these ties or even this roadbed on here and these platforms, it wouldn't be clear what this was. But I see this as just enough detail to communicate the idea without being distracting. And I felt like that gave me an indication of where I should stop and how far I should go. Similar to this building here, this is gray. I've cut the windows in because, again, I feel like it's needed for scale. If I'm just going to make it a gray shape, but it doesn't have any windows on it, it might be difficult to tell, how big it is and what its relationship is to everything else around it. But putting the windows in, just cutting them in and having them recessed, that was enough. So that's kind of how I decide to start and stop things. I've got a green area over here. This is, was just like overgrown brush and stuff. Still is like that today. But I painted this instead of gray, I painted this a very pale green. That's his abstract way of communicating that this is sort of green open space. And I felt like that was pretty much enough for me to communicate what I was trying to get across. A little bit about the construction. So that bridge is scratch built from wood, mostly wood and cardstock, and some Central Valley bridge shapes and styrene here. The wood and cardstock is admittedly old school method, but I really enjoy it, and it's worked out well for me. You can see here, this is the making of all the infrastructure. Again, this is largely built out of cardstock over stacked foam. I coat it with gesso to kind of homogenize everything, and then I start painting it. I start with an undercoat of yellow, which seems strange, but I do several layers of paint. You can see this yellow, and you can see here where I've covered it with a gray. I would go over it with a couple more washes of a warmer gray just to get a depth to it, to really begin to simulate the concrete without calling too much attention to itself. And then add some weathering. You can see here the drips and the support blocks for the truss bridge. Again, this is all the measurements that I took. And this just gives you a close-up view of how that was finished off. This abutment right here was also 3D printed from drawings that I made. And as are a couple of these, you can see another one down here, and those worked out really, really well. Structures in this area are mostly cardstock, again, old school method to build the shell, and then I laminate on various scale textures. There are several companies that make these. One of them is, I think there's a company called Clever Models. There are a couple other ones, but you can get what I've got here, corrugated metal and brick and so on and so forth. Again, very simple methods, but they work well for me. Just showing the east and west ends of that signature scene. You can see here is NA Tower. That's a scratch built model. I will look at that in a little bit. And then you can see here the opposite end of Broad Street with the entry to this. I believe this was a foundry. So we got coal and perhaps sand for casting in there. And you can see some buildings that I put in the foreground, which I thought was very important to make sure that the layout had a sense of depth and space. All right, so we're going to take a look at the portion of the layout. So prior to my move to Saudi Arabia, I was working very hard on getting bench work up for the new extension. So you can see here, this area is East Ferry Street. This is going to be Brills with the PRR going across. You can see a view block here. The staging kind of goes around here and bends around. There's where the loop is. You can see the hole here that allows you to still be kind of visually connected to the room and within the room. And again, the bench work is very simple. It's just plywood panels on these shelf brackets and then a very thick foam. I got this black foam from a good friend of mine who lives in Brooklyn, a fellow model railroader named John Chester, who was nice enough to lend that to me or give that to me. And this has worked out very well. Looking the other way, again, this will be East Ferry Street. Here's where the railroad goes around the corner, and you can see these two view blocks, 1 and then 2 here. These are very important because, again, you can see how the scene is framed by this, where this valance is. It's a very sort of tight frame that really helps to show off the trains, as we saw in some of the previous photos. So this area will be blocked off. So we'll just kind of come up to a view block and through, and then around this view block and through into the next scene at East Ferry Street. So one of the things about approaching a model railroad, doing some of these different ideas, is that it required that I maybe come up with some different techniques. So for example, here's how I made these view blocks. You know, these techniques aren't really new. These are all literally straight out of a theatrical scenery 101 book. But you know, this is just the flat with a plywood frame covered with the black velvet stapled to the back, and then there it is up with the hole for the CNJ tracks to come through, and this just press fits there with Velcro. You can see here how I've done my lighting. These are the two LED strips. Here's the valance. This is the underside of the lighting canopy and the backside of the valance with the backdrop. These two surfaces are both painted black. I know the conventional wisdom is to paint it white to reflect light, but I was doing something different here. So painting on both flat black helped me achieve the effects that I was looking for. Looking here, you can see here's how I handled the air conditioner, and you can see this other view block from the opposite direction. This is just a piece of styrofoam, like a mock-up I was using just to test fit this as I was designing my frames. Again, you can see the valance here and how that really frames the scene. You can't see this top edge of the backdrop here. That's very important to having that scene framed properly. And this is a panoramic view. This was taken by my older brother, Brian Jones. He, by the way, is the reason that I got into this model railroad racket because he had a layout when he was younger. He's much older than me. So when your older brother is 16 and you're 4, you know, that's everything he does looks like magic. So I kind of glommed onto that, and I've taken it to extremes, I guess. But I've had fun along the way. So you can see my architect's table that I use as a workbench. Here's the work table, and then here's the old railroad. The new railroad starts right about here and goes around, and you can see the view block there as well. So some of the other features of the railroad. So this is my model of NA Tower. This was scrap built, not quite finished yet. The building is finished. I need to paint it. Hopefully I can do that at some point when I return to New York City. This cabin portion is all 3D printed. And then this lower portion is built up of bits of styrene and phosphor bronze and nickel silver wire. A very small model. That's one of the things I really like about N-scale is the sort of jewel-like quality that the trains have. And I think doing a black backdrop and really making them pop helps actually N-scale trains to have a little more presence than they might otherwise have. You can see here, these are some dummy signals that I use just to begin to study the interlockings and the signaling and the limits of things and where things needed to be. During impromptu operating sessions, it helps me know where to stop and just gets me thinking about how a system like that is eventually going to work. Just another view of the interlocking. You can see the similarities between the model and the real one. So this shows you East Ferry Street. This is from the first version of the layout where it was flipped front to back and end to end, but it gives you an idea. Here's the parallelogram bridge. Here's the pairs of RDCs, always in pairs. Apparently that was to make sure that there was enough resistance to trip the track circuits that operated the signals on the CNJ. You can see here the triangular station with the trackside platform, just like you see in the prototype photo down there. This was the staging yard that I would use. Again, that would just lift in and out. It's very simple, but it worked really well. So a little bit about operations. I really enjoy operations. I've designed this railroad to be operated. The first iteration I would operate often just by myself on a work evening or on a weekend evening, just kind of running a few switching trains or just banging cars around in the yard or running a few commuter trains back and forth. And that was a lot of fun. But the neat thing about this layout and this prototype is that it has a lot of capacity to take operations really far, as we will see. So dividing the two components, basically passengers, there were long distance passenger trains, there were holiday specials, and then there were the commuter trains that constantly were cycling in and out of this station and through this interlocking plant. You can see I'm depicting one here. This one would be backing in to Newark, like the picture we saw earlier. The little engine terminal that's there's an opportunity for switching some of these trains. They can go in, and if they back in, or if they go in head first, rather, then this locomotive escape, which you see back here, can be used to cut the engine out, head to the engine terminal. It's a diesel. It doesn't need coal and water, but you might want to do something like add sand or something like that. This engine terminal is built to depict the CNJ, the first year of full diesel operation after steam. So the ash pit is still there. It's a little regrown, but it's still there and used to do very light servicing on diesel locomotives. And I've got a video here, which I hope I can pull up. Let me see if I can do that. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can get that to work. Hold on. Pointer options, not the laser pointer. Let's see. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Here's a short video, very short, just to give you an idea of how trains run on the CNJ Newark branch. All right, so here we are at Broad Street. So we just backed in, and after a suitable amount of time, we're ready to head out. We're going to reverse our lights. Tower operator. This simulates the model board in NA Tower. It's going to line us through. And I'm very pleased with these Atlas locomotives. They run great. I can get them sound equipped, as you can hopefully hear. And it's a real treat to just run trains, with these things. It's very enjoyable. Double flips. Follow him. On the eastbound track. So I also like how there are some buildings in front of the train that it kind of does a peekaboo thing going back and forth. And I feel like that helps give the layout a lot of extra depth as well. Passing by Ferry Street, East Ferry Street rather. And into staging. So what I might do in a more elaborate operating session is fiddle that train, pick it up and put it on the other track and back it back in the other way. With the reverse loop that I've got on the new design, I won't be able to do that. I won't have to do that. All I'll need to do is switch the locomotive and put it on the other end, and then just run it right back out if I want it to back in, or I won't even have to do that if I don't want it to, or if I don't need it to back in. So freight operations, there's a lot of opportunities for that. So I've gotten my trains divided into 4 basic ones here. They each do different things. The Broad Street drill is a train that basically would leave Brills as a caboose hop, and it would come up to Newark, and it would switch all the cars in the yard at Newark, leave them there, and then return to Brills as a caboose hop. The Broad Street turn would be the train that drops cars off and picks cars up from Newark Broad Street to take them back to Brills. And then the eastbound and westbound tramps are trains that go up the line from Brills, and they switch all the eastbound industries and then go back, and then or go all the way up to Newark and then come back down the westbound side and switch all the westbound industries and then finish up at Brills. So some of those trains might be able to be combined, but the switching and the switch arrangements on this branch were arranged to be done that way. You switch everything on one side, and then you switch everything going down the other. So there were pretty much no switchbacks or what I should call facing point switches. I believe that's the right term, to be switched on either main track. You can see on the lower right how I have this simulated model board that simulates NA Tower. I'm using these touch toggles from Barrett Hill Designs to light everything up and indicate the turnout direction so I know where things are going. This is a shot of the little staging yard, and these lighted buttons they just turn tracks on and off. And this is the switch list I use. I came up with this and I put it on a piece of 8.5 by 11. I fold it lengthwise, and you can see over here I stage a consist or two in the fiddle yard, and then I have at it. And it's really as simple as that. Car cards would be nice, but I feel like the switch list is pretty down and dirty. And because there's no classification unit on this railroad, it means that there's not really any there's no routing. So I'm not determining, well, this car goes to Boston and this car goes to, South Carolina and this car goes to Omaha. I don't have any of that. I'm just bringing everything to Brills, or I'm terminating it somewhere either in Newark or along the line. So I feel like it makes it easier for a switch list to function in a situation like that. So we're going to look at one more quick video. Again, not too long. Showing a little bit of how freight switching works. So this is the Broad Street drill, giving you a sense of what it would look like and feel like to switch cars at Newark. All right, now we'll head back into the yard. We'll grab our empties that we're taking with us. And now we'll get ready to leave going eastbound back to Brills. So this is happening toward the end of a session. So in this case, I ran the train where it was taking back cars with it to Brills. I've gone back and forth on that as to how to operate this train. So I was just trying out that method for this little session. So these cars over here have been placed earlier in the session and switched out. And now I'm getting all the outbounds, and I'm going to take those back with me to Brills. This is a lot of fun with a really nice, smooth running sound equipped locomotive from Atlas N Scale. And we're going to move out here slow and easy. And the nice thing about using a prototype layout design element is that when you get to operations, it works remarkably like the whole thing. You can see this train is pulling out onto a lead, so they can do all their switching using this lead. That's the track they're on now, without fouling these main tracks, eastbound and westbound. So there's no other trains as they're coming in and out of Newark that have to stop because this train is doing switching on the lead. And this is the prototype track arrangement. So it works the same way as the real one did, which is a really nice treat. And we've gathered that. We're going to throw, there's a switch down here that's a hand throw. So there's a guy on the ground throwing that. He walks back to the locomotive, hops on, and we're off back to Brills. All right. So we're near the end here, and I want to talk a little bit about what I'm working on now. As I mentioned in the beginning, right now I'm living in Saudi Arabia. I live in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I have set things up so that I don't have to stop modeling. On my way over here, I brought some track building supplies from Fast Track. I got all my jigs and everything. I don't know if I mentioned, but I hand lay most of my track in N scale. I really enjoy doing that. So I brought all my jigs and tools and supplies with me. I brought my cutting mats and an X-Acto knife and everything. And so I'm able to do make some progress on the new extension. I'm going to need several bridges, five plate girder bridges of various sizes and configurations. You can see this is a double track one that's it's a parallelogram. And five plate girders and two truss bridges, one Jefferson Avenue and the other one is the one at East Ferry Street. So I'm still building on the left. You can see a typical setup. I'm just there at my desk in my apartment with a podcast on the iPad and some cardstock and an X-Acto knife and a scale rule, and that's pretty much all I need. So I'm attempting to make some progress, even though I'm halfway around the world here. So with that, I am finished with the main presentation. So I am happy to take questions if anybody has any. All right, I see there's a question from Ron.
Hello, Jonathan. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I just want to congratulate you because after seeing your layout in person the first time and through all the progress you have done and the move and everything, I'm amazed of all the work you've done and everything you put together. I'm very pleased to see your work, buddy, all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jonathan,
Yes.
I think I've seen something like your emphasis technique on the scenery in museum exhibits, and I'm thinking it's actually a very effective idea in terms of doing the layout. But I wonder if you can still get your scenery certificate with scenery that looks like that.
Well, yeah, that's kind of going in between the lines there, I guess. Yeah, I wonder. I mean, if it was, but here's a question, sort of back at you. If I didn't do the black backdrop or the scenery in monochrome, would it then qualify for the certificate? Because I had a previous layout where everything was realistic. We saw a couple of shots of those. I'm curious about that.
I have to say I haven't read the details on what the certificate takes. I mean, the ones I've already done, it's a long list of things you have to do. So
yeah, of course. So, if I was gonna, I actually have looked through some of the requirements for that certificate. This is Bill Musteler is talking about the getting the certificates that you need to get your MMR, your Master Model Railroader certificate. And there are several sort of areas, scenery being one of them, which has subcategories like the backdrop and other things like that. And so if I was to do something and go for that, I might have to maybe do a diorama or something that's got some other scenery, or maybe there's some other layouts that I've worked on where I've done the scenery. Perhaps I could use that. I don't know, but I have spent a little bit of time thinking about that, but that's not a priority at this time. But yeah, that's where I am on that.
Jonathan, you make a good point there, and something that was in the back of my mind as I was watching was, first of all, a gentleman by the name of Monroe Stewart. I've heard him say several times that, in doing the scenery and such, it's to fool the eye and make the eye see what you want it to see, but do the amount of detail you need to make that happen, but don't overdo the detail. I think that makes sense to me, and what you're talking about with regards to your concept, it's sort of the same type of thing to me. It's to put the eye thinking what it's seeing, and what you've done is you've allowed me, in looking at your layout, to see that's a building and it's a bridge and so on. You sort of see how things fall together, but at the same time, I don't need necessarily the full roof and the whole thing to make that happen. So I think what you're presenting is very interesting to me, and to the question of, you know, the judging as such. I think that, you know, judging has been done in so many ways. I think there's sort of a tradition there, if you will, what we expect to see in terms of scenery and such. But sometimes we have to look at what's happening today, and we look at the ability to do 3D printing. That wasn't around 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I found your tower with the parts being 3D printed and the other being with styrene and such. The detail was there to me. So I guess it depends what the judges are looking for in terms of, you know, conformity. Does it show, you know, if I'm going to put the structure out there, if the structure, you show me a picture of the prototype and it appears to be like the prototype, you know, what degree do I judge that at? And I think that's the challenges of today's world with doing things a little differently.
Exactly. And I think you're exactly right, Ernie. And one thing I'd like to say is I often talk about this approach as reading the book instead of seeing the movie, right? Like like the book is almost always better than the movie, right? Why is that? Because, you know, the book kind of allows us to fill in a lot of details, right? And that is often a richer experience. And by doing things like the black backdrop and having the monochrome against the color, it allows the trains to pop and visually and have a lot of presence. And the scene doesn't get cluttered with, you know, the trees in the background being as detailed as the trains, and the, you know, it's just like sometimes like things get a little bit cluttered that way. So again, reading the book instead of seeing the movie is one thought that I have about my approach. I think Alex Belita has a question.
Yeah, not so much a question, Jonathan, as a comment. Setting aside the whole issue of certificates, I just want to compliment you on having a very original vision and approach. The way, and this clinic, the way you outlined the way you went about things, I thought was just, quite frankly, brilliant. And you know, we've always said that model railroading is supposed to be fun, and quite clearly you're having it. Certificates are not, you know, so really my compliments on an excellent presentation and a great, that museum approach that Bill mentioned, I think certainly works for you. So
thank you.
off.
Thank you. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Jonathan, how's it going? Great presentation. Thanks for staying up for us.
Thank you. Almost getting close to midnight here, but that's okay.
A couple of questions. The one thing that as if people don't know about your Facebook page, they should, to follow along with your progress there. That's a great thing for people to know about. So I had a little insights into your move, but I've been fascinated by that. Like, you're just getting started with this new phase in the railroad, and then you decide to move. That had to have been a really challenging decision. I mean, was it hard, or was the opportunity so great that you're like, I'm going for it?
The answer is yes. It was hard, but it was a good opportunity. So what I've attempted to do is just try to make the most of it on both ends, right? Like I pushed myself to get as much done on the you know, building the new part of the layout as I could, and then I said, you know, try to set myself up and organize myself so I'm not completely dormant, you know, while I'm over here. And we'll see how that eventually works out. But yes, it was hard, but I did want to take the opportunity. I didn't want to not take the opportunity because it would be hard. Like, that's kind of the easy way out, you know. And you know, model railroading is not, I wouldn't call it an easy hobby. So, you know, I'm not one to just like always take the easiest path. And I guess I picked this is another situation that I've gotten myself into, I suppose.
That totally makes sense. It just kind of struck me, you know, because the convergence of those two things kind of happening at the same time. In terms of the layout, why 1955? What was your thought process there on the time period?
So that was because 1954 on the CNJ Newark branch anyway was the last year of steam operation, and I cannot get Camelbacks and those, you saw those side tank 262s and N scale. So I said, well, if I move it to 1955, I can go with the H15 and 1644s and the RS3s, a couple of Baldwins, and those are all available, right, by Atlas. Just buy them off the shelf. They're painted for CJ already. You can put a coater in them, and you're done. So while I enjoy Steam, I actually am a Steam big fan of Steam. This was a compromise, but a compromise that I felt was realistic. The one other place where I kind of fudge it a little bit is that engine terminal you saw was defunct by 1950 or something. But in my version, I still have it because it's kind of cool. And I've done a lot of research on N-scale steam. And this is a project for far in the future, but Kato makes some Japanese prototype steam locomotives in the 262 side tank configuration. And perhaps with a new 3D printed shell, I can have my 262s. They also make a 264T locomotive that's very similar to the 464T locomotive. While the wheel arrangement is a little bit different, again, if I could 3D print a new shell for it, or maybe not even, it could be perfectly fine. Paint it up and weather it, and then maybe it's okay. Likewise, there are N-scale versions of 260 Maguls and 440 Americans that I think they're made. They used to be, I don't want to say, it wasn't model die casting, but I think now maybe Bowser or maybe makes them. And they're in N scale, and again, with a kit bash of a wider firebox and a new cab. There you go. So even still, maybe not impossible. Far in the future, but not impossible. But that's how I ended up choosing that era. I mean, it seems that's like the most logical way to sort of go about that.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's that's cool. I'm well familiar with era drift, so go for it if you have the chance, right? You can fall off. And then the last question I had for you was just about that thick black foam that you said you got from another modeler. It was hard to tell the texture of that, but I was curious about that material. That looks interesting.
Yeah, it's the same extruded foam that you would get, like the pink or blue stuff. It's denser. Like if you sort of push your thumb down on the pink and blue stuff, your thumb will go in a little bit. If you push down on that black stuff, it doesn't go in as much. It's used for exterior insulation on larger buildings. And this friend of mine, John Chester, works for a contractor. He's also a fellow architect and model railroader, and he happened to have some slabs of it. And he's like, "Here, you want it?" And I'm like, "Sure." So it's the same, but it's the same stuff. I mean, I cut it with a handsaw and like a big kitchen knife. It's the same stuff.
It's used a lot in the construction field for flooring.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. Well, great stuff. Thanks for the presentation. Fantastic as always. Always cool to see what you're up to.
Thank you, Todd.
Jonathan, I was going to come back to your new concept, and I mean you're sort of like the old Winston Link, if you will, with taking the pictures in the dark and using his flash bulbs to draw attention to what he wanted you to see.
Mm-hmm.
And if he didn't put a flash bulb or light it, he didn't want you to see it. But but by doing that, he pulled the details out, and I think that's what makes his picture so, in my mind, so impressive, and draws attention to what you're looking at. I can remember several of his pictures were, coming out of tunnels, or those were over top of swimming pools, or the one I can remember of the F-86. There's one version of the F-86 on the screen of the one not, but the thing was that the locomotive, and I think that's what he was trying to draw your attention to, was the locomotives. They came out of that picture. They weren't hidden, but they were the featured part of it, and that's what you've done with what you're proposing with your give them enough to think. And I think that's very impressive. And I too wanted to compliment your presentation and your style. It was just tremendous. And I mean, we've been going almost just a little bit short of 2 hours, but the time went very quickly. But you presented a lot of information in a very sequential manner that made very, very, very much sense to me.
Thank you.
And the last thing I'll say is, and I think I'm going to say this, and the others can agree or disagree, but your background in architecture, and that also gives you the ability to think outside the box a little bit in terms of being able to see shapes and the artistic part of it. And railroading, when you're doing scenery, I think is artistic.
Absolutely.
You can take a weed and make it a tree, if you will, and it's just the imagination is the limit of what you can do.
Absolutely. And I'll pick up just before we go, or before we close, on your comment about Winston Lincoln. I think you're exactly right. And my point was, and when I said my promise would be to you, would be to show you like different ways of thinking or approaching these things. And what he did was basically he approached it like an artist. He didn't say, well, there's a cool thing and here it is, right? He said, no. What is the context of this thing, and how can I put it in a different context and show its qualities in a way that's going to make it show up in a way that you wouldn't normally see it, which is going to make it special. And the other thing that he did, which artists also do, is he connected it back to the culture, right? Because he was showing something that was part of the culture in that part of the country at that time that was about to change very significantly. And he showed it in a way that was in some ways paradoxical. Again, like I said, like he showed a black steam locomotive at night. He used his lights to uplight the smoke, the black smoke, so you can see it, right? And so what he's done is he's come at the subject matter with a particular point of view, right? Not just to simply show it, right? And that's what artists do, and that's why his pictures, his photos, and a very small handful of other rail photographers are in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and maybe others aren't, because he has that sort of vision of it, and he wants to communicate those things, and that's a big difference.
Does anybody else have anything they want to say, Jonathan? He's done a fine job, in my opinion, today, and I greatly appreciate him taking the time out of his schedule and staying up as late as he has. I know well, for me, if I was there, I'd be in bed right now, probably sleeping, but it certainly has been a very interesting session to me. And just for a moment, I'm going to draw away from Jonathan, but Jack would not be happy if I didn't do this. We don't want to forget that the MER is coming to Durham in October, and the registration has opened for the MER convention. Jack, that's mid-October, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir. October 17 through 20.
So that's available out there for anybody. And of course, MER is our region, but some of you are outside of the region. And so registration is open, and I think we've got a very good convention coming down there. So I'll put the focus back on Jonathan now, just to say once again, thank you. And if anybody has any other questions.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent, Jonathan.
Thank you all so much, and have a good night.
Take care now.
Good night. Thanks.
Everybody else, take care now. I'm going to push
Good
the
night.
end button here.
Thank you, Ernie.
Take care. Jonathan, I'll be sending you an email with a nice, very impressive certificate that you can print out for the clinic, and we greatly appreciate your time again.
Thank you so much, Ernie. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Way to go, John.
All right, thanks, bye.